Edward Luttwak was a guest with us on Wednesday, and we thank him very much for giving us his time again today. This presentation is sponsored by Telstra, we're happily to announce as well. It says here, Edward Luttwak is a senior associate at the Centre for Strategic Studies, USA, and has served as a consultant to the Office of the Secretary of Defense, the National Security Council, the US Department of State, the US Army, Navy, and Air Force. It then goes on, but that would be taking up your time. Please welcome Edward Luttwak.
Thank you. Well, this is part of the story of war, which is creativity, science, and advance. I distinctly remember that it was about 25 years ago that we approved the first budget to spend on image recognition. And the aim was to have a device in an aircraft that would fly over a battlefield and recognize a tank. Now, you might think that anybody could recognize a tank, but actually there are dozens and hundreds of different perspectives on it, and and we didn't have the fancy computers, so lacking the computers, people were forced to think. Out of the thought came a lot of the ideas which are now being applied. Watch out with these robots, because you make a robot in the shape of your wife, the robot gets angry, beats you up, or you automate all the mining machinery in Australia. The Chinese companies buy the mine and the machinery, and then I suppose the Australians will be going to conferences to talk about robotics, because they won't have any other employment. However, creativity is one aspect of war, which continues. Another aspect of war that continues is the one that's very elemental, the one that technical people call tactics, people fighting guns in hand. That is the fascinating and fun part of war. That's why people go to war, the ability to jump around with guns. If people didn't find that fun and fascinating, of course, there'd be no wars. Because there've been, of all the thousands of wars in history, about 3 of them were fought by conscripts. 3 of them were fought by people who were drilled into an army involuntarily. All the others were fought by volunteers, as indeed is the case today. If you go to the United States and you go and interview people and ask them, excuse me, why did you join the Marine Corps and not the Army? The Marine Corps pays exactly the same as the Army, no better, but much bigger chance of being in combat, much bigger chance of being killed. The Marines are just much more warlike. And the answer is, that's why I joined the Army, to go into war. This hasn't changed. I've been in combat myself, and I've always feel sorry for people who were abed on St. Crispin's Day and have never had the experience of it. But that hasn't changed either. Therefore, people wrongly believe that war and peace are always the same, and war is with us, it's the Trojan War, it's Gallipoli, Afghanistan, it just goes on and on. The answer is no. In our lifetimes, or at least the lifetime of your parents, a huge, colossal, world historical revolution took place. And that is that war underwent an irreversible, a gigantic transformation. Before nuclear weapons, the war was the business of the great powers, of the superpowers, of the big boys, the serious boys, the people who do research and development, science, creativity, dominate economics, have the money, have the power, have the knowledge. They're the ones who did war. Then, as part of the struggles of the great powers, in the creativity of the struggle, because the struggle since ancient days has been creative, out come nuclear weapons. Now, nuclear weapons are simply too powerful to be useful. Too powerful to be useful. That was not clear instantly. At first they thought that it might be just like other weapons, but more efficient, more effective. Don't drop 1 million bombs, just drop 1 and so on. Then the discovery was made. It took decades. It was such a world revolution in mind that they're too powerful to be useful, which means that the great powers, the serious powers, the powers of wealth, creativity, science, and so on, they are not fighting. No, there is not going to be the China-America war, the Russia, and so on, the other would-be great powers, the British, the French. None of them are going to fight each other. War, in the centrality of war, its great importance in history, It's in every respect, from the domination of glittering field marshals in the history of Europe and the world. All of this depended on one thing, and that is that the greatest powers, the big boys, the important boys, they engaged in war as the great business. That was the great business of statecraft. The Minister of Defense outranked the Minister of Finance, certainly the Minister of Education, the Minister of Development, and so on. That was the main thing. States were structured to fight war. Of course, they only fought now and then, but they were still structured for it. That was the main business. Well, it's no more true. Simply not true anymore. So what's left on the scene? Well, a number of phenomena are really worth looking hard at. One lot is not that important, and that is these bellicose, aggressive, loudmouthed sort of states like North Korea and Iran that are always shouting and shouting. If their shouting goes far enough, their provocations go far enough, and there is actually any fighting, they crumble like tofu, like the Mandarin, the same Chinese, dry tofu. They just crumble, just like Saddam Hussein with his thousands of armored vehicles, hundreds of combat aircraft, huge numbers of surface-to-air missiles, and all the panoplies of war, looking as if it was really an important military power. Then the collision takes place with the real power, and they just crumble. So let's leave them aside because they really are the loudmouths on the scene, and the moment they really do any biting, they will be wiped out. So what's left? How come there's still war? Well, this is where really we have to look very hard at, because there are two sorts. One sort is a really special phenomenon, and that is the Anglo-Saxon tendency of wanting to go elsewhere and tell people how to live. And to go to Afghanistan and persuade the Afghan people to forget their traditions, and there was an op-ed in the New York Times, a woman wrote, "We've been in Afghanistan for years, we spend all this money, and yet women continue to be oppressed." Yes, so the answer is we're going to put a Marine in every Afghan family. Husband slaps the wife, which he does every day. Marine shoots the husband, and now everybody's happy. Fact is, this is the frivolous war. You begin, back in 2001, the Al-Qaeda attacked the United States. It was a wonderful thing. I participated in it. I'm happy I did. Go there, knock off the Taliban, chase the Al-Qaeda to the extent that you can, and so on. But now it's entirely different. This Obama-Afghan war, this has to do with saving the Afghans, making them democratic, God knows what else. And of course, the Afghans obediently line up for their photographs and so on, and they do as they're told because they're getting $7 billion of money flowing into Afghanistan, some of it spent by Australia. And this money is efficiently intercepted by the government in Kabul, which uses it to build villas and apartments and other stuff and import expensive Italian plumbing. That's why every time some Marine or Army general, Allied general conquers a town in Afghanistan, drives out the Taliban and expect the government to come in and build schools and hospitals, they don't show up because they're waiting for the plumber to come there and install the complicated new stuff for their beautiful apartment. So there's this Afghanistan, Iraq. This is a transitory fever. It will pass. For at least 20 years, the Anglo-Saxon bellicosity will find some other outlet. Now, then there is another lot, which is the lot that we really need to look at and really need to rethink. And that is the protracted conflicts scattered around the world, which have been caused by frivolous outside interventions, motivated by the best of intentions, humanitarian intentions and so on. And it happens like this. There's somebody fighting, obviously not one of the big boys, because the big boys don't fight. Local people fight. Pictures or stories come out, atrocities, people getting killed. Now, usually with the United Nations mechanism, the ceasefire machinery gets to work. Now listen, war too has a purpose. The purpose of war is to burn out the desires of war, the resources of war, the hopes, the ambitions that cause people to fight. If you go into war, the only virtue of war is that it destroys itself. You go into war full of strength and this and that and desires and fears and so on. Then in the course of fighting, you've had your fun, you've had your fascination, then the blood starts flowing, your best friend gets killed and other things. Statesmen's hopes turn out to be unrealistic, and then the war ends. But if you have the United Nations, if you have this mechanism where the outsiders come in and impose a ceasefire, you congeal war, you prevent war. And that's why, ever since the foundation of the United Nations and this perverse machinery of intervention, we have these protracted conflicts like Kashmir that never end, like the Palestinian thing, never ends. In the African situation, the Democratic Republic of Congo, with its constant fighting with Rwanda and so on, which never ends. Rwanda is a military empire, and they won't allow it to do the job of a military empire, which is to conquer Eastern Congo and finish with it. Not only the United Nations, but the plague of NGOs, all of them motivated by the best of motives. They go in to feed the refugees, so they don't scatter and go and find new lives, but hang around and wait to prolong the conflict and go back to it. In the case, of course, of the Hutu-Tutsi fighting in Rwanda, naturally the NGOs flock there to feed the Hutus so they could eat in the morning and go back and kill Tutsis at night. This scandal was, the ultimate. But basically, you have the United Nations intervening and preventing war from achieving its purpose, which is to bring peace. If we had this historically, in Europe, there wouldn't be no states, there'd be no cathedrals, there'd be no palaces, no culture, no nothing. Just be refugee camps for Visigoths, Longobards, scattered Romans, lost Germans, all fed by different NGOs under different ceasefires and so on. This is what we have created, a monster created. The next time somebody from the Save the Children Fund turns up at your doorstep asking for money, hit him, unleash the dog on him, send him away. Because they are the ones who come in and prevent the mechanisms of war from accomplishing its purposes. Or even worse, they go in when there's famine, and there is half the people starving, and the other half of people are the peasants who still have some food to sell, but they can't sell the food because to save the children, they descended with all these beautiful blonde people who hand out food, feeling themselves to be saintly. And they're bankrupting and ruining the half the population that isn't starving there. So we have frivolity, instead of the spirit of colonialism, as what the British found it necessary to go to 120 different places. Stamp collectors can go and get Basuto land and Birano land and all this. The British felt the need to occupy every single spot in the face of the planet in order to bring the benefits of Queen Victoria and so on. Now we have NGOs doing this stuff. Very perverse. The best intentions, understandable desire, but please notice that it truly is perverse. Perverse because when there are the genocides, the big massacres, whether it's the Khmer Rouge killing their own people, 2 million is the number, Rwanda, 800,000, or Darfur, 200,000, they never intervene. They never intervene. Neither the United Nations, under different rules and dispensations, whether it's state sovereignty or the fact that the Chinese are against it or the Arab League won't allow it in Darfur and so on, miraculously, the justification for all of these interventions is to prevent genocides and huge massacres. Somehow, it never happens. So in Bosnia, when they were bombing and killing Sarajevo, nothing happens. When Srebrenica happens, of course, it happens because of the UN. Those Bosnians would never have been there if hadn't for the false promise of protection of the UN troops with their baby blue helmets there, supposedly protecting them, and worked. But when there is no intervention, nobody saves them, they die. When there is the intervention, it's like Kosovo. In Kosovo, there was no genocide, no massacre. That's when they intervened and bomb and do and that to save the Kosovars from genocide and massacre. And I believe the total number killed was 1,800 and in the whole period, not 1.8 million or 180,000. So this is what we have to look at. We have to look at what the consequences are of interfering with the processes of war. And just think Sri Lanka, where this atrocious and horrible, disastrous, destroying conflict of Sri Lanka finally ends because you have a Sinhalese, of course, regime that brutally ends the war, finishes them off, drives them out, and now Sri Lanka has the possibility of peace. However, if any of the NGOs, Human Rights Watch, whatever, all of these, plague of them, could have had their way, they could have intervened and stood and interposed themselves, preferably with television on them, then again, this thing would continue in the Jaffna Peninsula. Still, there would be unresolved conflict. This is what you have to think very hard at. The impact of good intentions realize themselves on the international scene with its perverse consequences. Thank you.
Am I still in the right room? I think so. Thank you, Edward. Thank you very much.